Welcome to the season finale of Education Contemplation. We've done a lot through these last 3 episodes, and I hope this 4th one is beautiful as well. As always, I am your host, Joshua Preza.
I'm Francis.
I'm Gustavo.
And I'm Juan Fernandez, and today we are joined by our perfect host.
Perfect host.
Yes.
Miss Soderholm.
Dr. Charles Ezell.
All right, and we brought these guests today to talk about a very, very important topic. Since it's our last episode of the season, we're going to talk about something important. So we're going to talk about COVID and post-COVID in schools. A lot to talk about, so let's just get right into it. So I guess to start, we can go a little bit on the teacher shortage. And I was wondering, as a VP, Dr. Ezell, like, what are your opinions on, I guess, the teacher shortage and all that stuff has been happening because of COVID?
So do you want me to look at you or the camera, by the way?
Don't look at me.
You're pressing, okay. So the information I have is strictly anecdotal, right? I haven't reviewed data, but I have an impression that that a lot of teachers left the profession, especially older teachers, because they were scared, because they were concerned about, the health concerns. And I think that a lot of other people aren't going into education, but I'm not sure if it's actually related to COVID in any way. I suspect that education itself, the profession, has changed. The way it has been viewed by the public nationally has changed, and also at the state level. And as a result, there are fewer people who are interested in being teachers, which is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. And I can see that because I was doing my own research, and I saw in the last 10 years, in just New Jersey alone, 1,500 less people are pursuing degrees in education. It's like I kind of see, like, I don't know if the problem is necessarily teachers quitting or just a lack of new teachers, because a lot less people are deciding to go into the profession itself.
I agree. I think my impression is that we are getting fewer young, people who are interested in doing the work. And I think there's probably a host of reasons for that.
Do you think that the conditions that teachers are in, even before COVID, but especially during and after COVID, you think they've been worse, or you think that might affect why we're having such a shortage?
It's interesting. So I think that the conditions under which people work are often especially in New Jersey, more so than other states, very much localized by the town that they live in. Other places have county systems. We have town systems. And so I think that the conditions under which people work are very much localized. So I think it's hard to have a blanket statement about that. What I would say is that about probably 11 years ago, I'm not exactly sure, it was under Governor Christie, there was a change in the compensation package for educators, where they reduced pension benefits, increased pension contributions, increased health contributions by educators, and I believe that had an impact on how people viewed their employment. But do I think that teachers teach in worse conditions? I don't. I think that this school is a great example. This school was not as nice as it was 7 years ago, or 6 years ago, or 4 years ago. Right there have been real strides by communities to revitalize learning environments. And so I think that the challenge, though, if we're talking about conditions, is that when you have fewer teachers, then you have fewer people to teach children, which means that sometimes teachers are asked to do more, teach an extra class that they wouldn't normally teach, right? And some people like that and some people don't. So I think really that's contextualized by who the individual is to see, right? Some teacher wants a 6th class, other teachers don't, right? So they may view that a little differently.
And Mr. Holm, obviously as a teacher, what have you felt about the students and I guess having all the people post-COVID? Do you think it's been changed? Do you think it's
Well, just interestingly enough, he actually signed that pension reform literally in the month before I got my teacher certification. So that was literally impacted me directly, but that's neither here nor there. I think so someone who has been in this building for 9 years and who has been an educator for 2 more years than that, I have a really specific opinion on it, and a lot of it has to do with kind of this idea of, who the teacher is, what the teacher responsibilities are, where you work, and all that stuff. So, like, a lot of us have kind of this mindset that's kind of hard to fight, which is like the pre-COVID student. And you might hear like a lot of the teachers and stuff talk about, well, kids didn't used to be like this before COVID. Kids didn't used to be like this before remote learning. And like personally, there is some truth to that. But it is taking into consideration that a lot of these kids were the same kids before COVID, but were at home for 2.5 years on mute with very limited interaction with their peers or the teachers. Because you have to remember, when we had 2.5 years, away from these kids or like largely away from them, they used to be here all the time. We had kids that got here at 7 in the morning and didn't leave here till 8, 9 at night. So in a way, it was almost kind of like they were literally our kids because we had them for a majority of their actual existence.
Yeah, I completely understand.
So obviously that kind of relationship is different. So with a lot of these kids, and I have sophomores almost every year. So I get them at that kind of weird transition where they're coming from the freshman building and they were in middle school and like it's their first time in this building. And, sophomores are always wacky. They just are. And for the last couple of years that we've been back in person, there are very distinct personality changes in a lot of the students, particularly, and some people might disagree with me, particularly with the teenage boys. Because I found that a lot of my girls during remote would still talk to each other, still FaceTime their friends, still, find ways to, have a lot of social interactions, but a lot of my boys didn't. They stayed at home and they stayed in their bedrooms with their, their Andrew Tate podcasts and, their video games and stuff like that. And it really kind of fundamentally changed the way a lot of boys' outlook on just everything became. And we came back here and for a lot of teachers, and not to say that a lot of teachers, not including me, don't kind of feel the effect of like, wow, this job is really different, because it really is. We come back and like, I'm one of those people that's so big on kind of the social emotional proponents of kids post-COVID, but there are a lot of teachers that, are not built for that, and that's okay. But it is difficult for a lot of teachers to make that adjustment because kids are different at every single age level. And, teacher shortages are very noticeable, obviously. Like Dr. Ezel said, we're covering more classes. We have more things to do because there's just less people in the building than there used to be. And a lot of it too, a lot of them did quit during remote because we had a lot of teachers that were near retirement age and they're like, I don't want to learn Google Classroom. This is too much. And they
honestly, going back to how you said how maybe girls were different, I'm not gonna lie, I was guilty of that. Most of the time during COVID, I just kind of locked myself in my room. When I would go out, it wouldn't really be too much with my friends. It would just me going out just to go out.
To be outside, yeah.
Exactly, because I was used to it. Back in middle school, I was used to just being stuck in my house a lot. But then I finally got used to being outside a lot, and then COVID kind of brought it back. So I was trying my best not to go back into that habit, if that made sense.
No,
So
it does.
overall, during COVID, I feel like I went back a lot, and then once we came back, it was it took me a sec for me to actually get back to normal and actually get used to socializing.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. I had a
Definitely.
student last year who, this student had a lot of anxiety as a wore the mask, had anxiety attacks in the hallway, constant. This year, the same student, because the student was wearing the mask not as a COVID precaution, but as you can't see my face, so that gives me less anxiety because you can't tell my emotions kind of thing. And this year, the student is actually a lot less anxiety, has a lot more friends, very different child from last year. So you see that there are students that are actively saying no, I can't let it be this way again this year. And I will say, this year, especially our students, there are a lot of things that are better.
Yeah, I've heard that from a lot of teachers. Last year, I heard the juniors were absolutely terrible.
Like us
And
juniors?
yeah.
Oh.
And I definitely do see that. And from what I've seen and from what I've heard from teachers, it still isn't like very like amazing, but it's definitely a step up from last year.
Can I ask you a question? When you say terrible, can you define that?
By terrible, I mean like a lot of us just were not used to it, because I remember in assembly actually how we behaved really badly, and basically a lot of people said like you have to remember that the juniors are basically like the sophomores last year, because we went straight from not even finishing our freshman year, which was a whole different building, straight into being juniors.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, interesting. So, I mean, I think what I hear you saying is that their behavior was not as mature, right? Just to
Exactly.
clarify, terrible,
Yeah,
right?
we
So,
we got set behind.
I didn't think any kids were terrible. I thought they were kids who were struggling with some
Terrible,
stuff. but-
yeah, terrible was an exaggeration.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear. I didn't want to be
That's
attached
okay.
to terrible
Sometimes
kids. I
kids are
didn't think that
terrible.
was a thing.
Sometimes it happens, or sometimes adults are terrible. It happens. No, but the thing is that like as a teacher, there are definitely days in the past 2 years where I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Is this the right job? Do I want to do this anymore? Like it's tough, and you see. And I think it's kind of funny generationally too, because I see a lot of people that I know that are younger that are like more Gen Z teachers, I guess to say it that way, who are leaving the profession after a year or two because they, I guess, maybe tolerate less. I don't know how to kind of put that. They're like, no, I'm not going to be abused by a system, or I'm not going to do the thing that I don't want to do. And like, you know what? And I tell you guys this in Tomorrow's Teachers. I say, the first day that I don't like this job anymore, what am I going to do?
Quit.
Quit. You know, because like life is really too short to do a job that you don't like. And that counts for teaching too. But I think as far as, you know, a lot of the things that I see, I'm lucky. I do actually really love my job. I love here. You know, I do. Like there's no kids quite like Amboy kids, and you know, it's true, and that I mean that in a completely 100% positive way. You know, I've taught in other places before this, and the kids here are just different in a really good way. I think that's why so many of us struggle. So many of us that do feel this way about this building and these kids and this school and things like that do struggle so much with a lot of the kids' issues post-COVID, because we feel kind of like we have fundamentally always put forward so much effort, and I think, you know, for a lot of us, some of us have put in more effort in the past 2 years than we ever have done in all of teaching. And for some kids, it doesn't reach them. And that's frustrating. And that, I think, too, contributes to some people's feelings of just like, maybe I can't do this anymore. So, I mean, I'm lucky. I feel kind of excluded from the whole idea of teachers in districts who are like, you know, it's a big systemic issue or it's a top-down issue. There are always going to be top-down issues. But largely, a lot of the issues that I know and some of my friends in district have too is just like, it's hard adjusting to kind of the new kid. But you know, you have to remember too, like we all are traumatized from COVID and remote.
Definitely.
So it's kind of, you got to kind of take that into consideration, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people also don't want to say they're like traumatized from it, like it affected them. Like, oh, you know, I went through it. I heard some people say, oh, I liked it. Oh, it was fun, but like at the end of the day, I feel like anybody like would never really want to go through that again.
Oh, definitely.
Oh, no. Like I said, I understood being home and remote, and I loved like the whole like wear a dress top and then sweatpants, you know, like
had
on
its fun
the camera.
moments,
But you know,
yeah.
like I missed being here. I missed seeing
Exactly.
actual people. The talking to a screen thing, especially when you would have kids that would like turn their camera off and like they didn't realize it. For a lot of teachers, that was so not like traumatizing, but it made you feel so alone.
Kind of dehumanizing. but
Yeah,
that might be,
like
a
you,
harsh
it just
word.
because you wanted to see faces, and I'll never
Exactly.
like, or so I would have like the cameras off, or like there would be like the ceiling fan, and I would have kids the next year be like, "Miss, don't you recognize me?" I'm like, "Well, what? Show me a picture of your ceiling fan, because like then I will know, then I like then I'll know who you are." But it's you know it's one of those things that nobody got out of COVID and remote learning unaffected.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry if you say that you did, you're lying.
I completely
And there are,
agree with
yeah,
you.
and there are like a lot of statistics that prove this. I actually did some research on this right before we recorded. A CDC study or survey states that more than a third of high school students reported they experienced poor mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 44% reported that they persistently felt sad or hopeless during the past year.
That's a big number.
What was
Yeah.
that? What was that number? 40?
44%.
Yeah. I'd say even that was an underestimation.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I
Yeah.
personally don't know anyone like that hasn't told me that they didn't go through a lot during that quarantine.
Yeah. I feel like COVID, it had such a drastic shift in everyone's social paradigm. Like everyone, we act and we talk a certain way because that's just how we are. It fits into our paradigm. But when you're put into isolation for a year and a half on end with like no one to talk to, barely any time to go outside, you come back, your paradigm is going to shift. You're going to do things differently. You're going to act differently. I feel like at my school, particularly charter, there's been an influx of fights since COVID, since we all came back. And I feel like that's because everyone's been so stressed, so tired of being online that once you come back, it's very difficult to re-socialize.
I don't remember if I talked to it with you or even on this podcast, but we touched about how after we came back from COVID, even in this school, there was more fights than usual. And basically, we said how it was just because people simply forgot how to act. They
Yeah.
forgot how to act.
And a lot of them were over things that were like, would be very, very like strange. And it was
Exactly.
literally over things that you could have spoke about and
Exactly.
it, you
People
know.
just forgot how to act.
But
Exactly.
but again too, but like finding your voice post remote learning. You spent an entire 2 years or whatever going, are you on mute? Dion, make sure you're on mute. Make sure you're on mute. Make sure you're on mute. And I was funny because we had a colleague of mine made a comment. Says, I can't get anybody to talk up in my class. Nobody participates. And I said because they just spent 2 years like being told that they couldn't turn their microphone on.
Yeah.
You know, so
Let me offer an additional idea. It's not to refute this idea that when you say kids don't know how to act, I'm going to argue that what you're saying is that some people lost some socialization. But I think that there are two other important things that happened over that time period. The first is 1 million people died. And I think it would be hard-pressed to find people, students, young people, who weren't impacted by that. Maybe not directly, maybe it wasn't a sibling or a parent, but it could be a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or somebody, and I think that has a cost.
Definitely.
And I think that that's important. And I also think that schools perform an important function that people don't always know about, because if everything's working for you, it's not useful. But there are kids in every community in this country where they're going through mental health challenges, or they have some trauma at home, and the research is clear that schools are where that's discovered, and in many cases, and where help and support can be found.
Completely
And
agree.
So for a couple of years, because of the pandemic, while schools tried to provide those same services, I go outside and I say hi to kids in the morning. I do that because I like kids. But I also do it because when I can see some children and I can see that they look sad, or they look anxious, or they look angry, or they've been wearing the same clothes for 5 days in a row. And that gives me an opportunity to say to them, hey, how are you doing? Or take a counselor and say, hey, counselor, go meet with this child because there's something I want you to just kind of feel them out, right? And so for a period of time, there were children who needed support. And let me be clear, this isn't casting aspersions on families, right? This is not that, right? I have children. Great people can have children and not be aware of what's going on in their children's lives, right? But we see kids. Certainly my children's school sees my child more than I do. And so we provide a service in that place. And so for a couple of years, kids who had some difficult things, some things they had to navigate, didn't have the support of a school. And so they come here, and there's a large cohort of people who didn't have stuff resolved. And we just had to work through it. And so sometimes, people act in ways that aren't pro-social, right? They fight, or they argue, or they've lost the capacity to negotiate a conflict in a way that's helpful, not because they don't have the ability, but because their life is so filled with stressors, or they have mental health challenges that haven't been addressed. And that comes at a cost. And so I think that we did see some of that when we first started. And that is, I'm happy to say that I see a significant difference. And I think that's because people we've been able to get help to folks. And
Well,
so,
school provides coping mechanisms too, just inherently, but a lot of them, I know even pre-COVID, like kids wanted to be in school because they felt comfort in people in this building. And they sought comfort that way, and when they did not have those people, it was different. And so when you don't have these coping mechanisms that school would normally provide you, you have to go through other ones. And like one of the things that, is this increase in the vape usage. That was not a huge problem prior to COVID, but kids had to divert into a way to cope with everything that was going on. And like you said, 1 million people, I could tell you 30 students of mine who lost a immediate family member in this community. And when you don't have, your guidance counselor, your favorite teacher, your cheer coach, someone in the building that you could always go to and just sit and talk with, you have to find other ways to do it. And, it's not to say, the people in this school raised these kids, but like you said, your son's
It's a pretty big
school
part.
sees your son more than you do because you're working and stuff.
I've gotten phone calls, hey, Henry had X, Y, and Z. I wasn't aware. And I benefited from the contact that he had with another person, a professional, who saw that he was sad.
Yeah. No, but that's a lot of the kids, and it's different ways, and it's and you tried to do things like that in remote, but it just wasn't the same. I tried to make my living room, the wall of my dining room or whatever, look kind of like a classroom, but
Yeah.
like it's a dining room.
It's not the same thing, and not just that.
It's like a dog snoring in the background. Like it's not the classroom, and it's not like with mine where I have all the and why are you collecting all these Squishmallows now? Like why are you spending all this money and this and that? It's like, well, first of all, mind your business, but second of all, the kids, like last year I had one Squishmallow and they would go and they would grab it and they would just hold it and they would do work with the Squishmallow in this one hand. And so like we just started collecting them because kids do need comfort. Like we think a lot of times too. There was so much focus during COVID and kind of like right after we came back from remote on like what the impact was on like little kids. And we're just getting the research where it's like, teenagers aged 3 years in a bad way from COVID and stuff like that. But like they forget that you older kids lost stuff too.
Exactly. I wanted to add to that. COVID happened during some of the most important years of our life.
Yeah.
Yeah, we struck right in the middle of our high school
Exactly.
career.
Yeah.
Or right as we entered, more like.
So kind of how you guys said, school raises us. It's part of the reason, like it's part of what basically we are results to like how we are treated in school, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you are a product of your environment,
Mm-hmm.
right? Genetics is about 15%, and the rest
Exactly.
is your environment, the experiences you have, the people you interact with, the love that you get, and
School is a pretty big part.
Schools play a big part in that, especially communities like this one where I think people. I have to say, I've worked in other schools, and what I see in this community is that there is a focus on caring in a way that is not always the case. There are other schools that are very transactional. There's and this isn't to malign them, right? Different communities have different standards, right? But those communities are sometimes very transactional. That the school plays a role, and that role does not include love. And so, that's just, and so here, if a community, and I think from this is only my second year here, but my view is that this community's education system is focused on caring for children, not just teaching, but caring. And so to the extent that we were digitally divided, some of that caring, it doesn't come through the same way, right? As a matter of fact, there's research that says that when you have a digital divide between you and someone else, there are these neurons called mirror neurons, and they don't fire. They don't actually recognize the humanity of the person on the other side, even though you see them, right?
I mean, yeah, even in our person-to-person life, we can tell the difference between like a digital call versus actual like face-to-face contact.
Right.
Like it is very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, not that we don't get on you guys for all being at the same lunch table, all on your phones talking to each other when you're literally right there. No, but you know what? You guys are working on that. It's definitely better. The cafeteria is definitely more face-to-face now than it was last year. It definitely was.
I do think, though, that COVID, right, very important, right? But I also, so I think an outcome of COVID was that we, as systems and structures, and we reinforced, I think, a negative thing. I believe that social media and digital tools are not good for people. The research is increasingly illustrating this, right? And so necessarily, because we had to be separate, we reinforced it. We actually leveraged it more, right? Which means that you, as young men in this case, you were all, the school now is endorsing like all of this kind of rigorous digital usage. And I think it comes at, I think that all of this digital stuff comes at a cost.
Definitely.
You know, I mean, for all of human evolution, we've been evolved to do this, right? We have eyebrows so that we can communicate emotions. They don't really, maybe they stop some sweat from coming down, right? But when you text people or when you do an Instagram or whatever the case may be, you lose all the benefit of those hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. And,
Yeah.
and so, yeah.
Oh,
And I think that
definitely.
matters with
Just
education.
go back to being primitive.
Exactly. I feel like with social media, especially now with the rise of TikTok and other like short 30-second like video formats, we're kind of desensitizing human interaction.
And you're making your attention span
Exactly.
to almost, it's like an instant
halt.
gratification attention span.
But you're
Exactly.
also getting dopamine,
Yeah.
right?
And-
Every time you find a TikTok you like, you get just a little pop of dopamine, just a little one,
exactly.
right? But dopamine is a drug,
Yeah.
right? And so all of us, because I'm not going to lie, I find TikTok delightful.
Me too.
I think it's hilarious. There are infinitely creative and wonderful people out
Letting
there.
all the old people on
Um,
TikTok.
But I'm also aware that I can look at my phone and be like, wait, it's 2 in the morning?
Yeah.
And I started at 10. How did this
Yeah.
happen? And then I realized that I'd sent my wife 47 videos that I thought were funny, and she's on the other side of the couch. We could have just like been like, hey, let's look
Yeah.
at this together. But instead, we were both independently TikToking and then texting each other back and forth. It's really kind of amusing.
Yeah, there's times where I've been sitting in my living room and then my sister texts me even though she's on the same couch as me.
Right. It's
And
absurd.
It's absurd, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's exactly as you said, it's instant gratification.
It
you know?
is.
Whenever you like a post, like that red heart that pops up, whenever someone follows you, likes your story, like it makes you feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
And I just think it's absolutely crazy how we've evolved or devolved as a society to kind of just rely on these actions to kind of fuel us, especially post-COVID.
Right. Well, we like to be affirmed, right?
Yeah.
You like to feel good. That's interesting.
And remember, like, that whole idea of just that positive affirmation, like, a lot of people did not have that at home. And now, too, it's almost like for a lot of kids, because those were those fundamental years, for you guys, it's so much harder. Like, with my own kids are 7 and 5, and, you know, I spent obscene amounts of money for my older son to go in person to school the entire time. So he went to a Catholic school. It was tons and tons of money. But he, I feel, is more socially adjusted because he, even though wearing the mask and the shield and having the desk shields, he was in school the whole time interacting with other kids. Everybody did not have access to that. You know, and so that is that also creates gaps to other kids. You know, my youngest son is in kindergarten this year. He did go to daycare in person, the same thing, masks and stuff like that, the whole time. But there are a lot of little kids, and we saw it when we were at Ignacio Cruz and in Patton for our teacher observations, is a lot of the little kids have a lot of social and communication issues because they've been home. In all those years, they should have been developing social cues and developing
Yeah.
Not just that, but
relationships.
for younger kids, that's like a significantly
It's a
larger
very bad
portion of their
issue.
life.
Their brains are little sponges at this time. This is when they're
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
everything, interacting with people, language based. So I think you're gonna start seeing too with a lot of students and language development issues and cognitive issues because
You know, COVID,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I tend to be an optimist about most things. So I think some really good things have come out of COVID too. I've been an educator for 20 years,
Wow.
and I can tell you that the growth in the implementation of instructional technology over COVID was the equivalent of 10 to 15 years of
Oh,
what
absolutely.
we would have done before.
Yeah.
We got an infusion of money from both the state and federal government, and those were things that were seriously lacking and have helped us to create better tools for young learners. Our teachers have grown and learned in ways that they were forced to, right? Necessity required that they do it, you know, and new software platforms have been developed that are engaging and interesting.
My Bitmoji usage has tripled at least.
And I think that is a good thing.
And
right?
I love it. I love my
Maybe not your
Bitmojis.
Bitmoji, but you know,
Everyone,
but instructional
everyone
technology
loves
growth,
the Bitmojis.
right? I mean, the
That
instructional
goes out.
technology done in this district by Dr. Pepe and her team, right? They took a system that was not prepared, and in a short period of time, ramped up the physical devices, the backbone that allowed it to be supported. And then teachers got tremendous amounts of professional development so that they were able to use these tools in a way that was effective. And the other part of that is that in education, there's something called differentiation. It's part of multiple intelligence. It's a theory that says that different people learn in different ways. Some people process auditorily, some people process visually. Well, prior to COVID, right, we as a vocation or a profession, we've been trying to help teachers grow so that when they teach a lesson, they don't teach it through a single modality. It's not just chalk and talk, that was the line, right? Well, now teachers are regularly engaged in collaborative work, right, which we know is important, or visual representations of things. And so I think that that's a great thing that came out of COVID, and I think the dividends are gonna pay on that down the road.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
like-
it definitely prepares. It's going to definitely prepare you guys for a lot of different career technologies and stuff like that. It does. It will make you more advanced than generations before you on how to do it, because everything works on technology. Every company,
Yeah.
every system. So it will. And you know, I do like his optimism in that, because I do feel a lot of things are improved. Even the simple fact that if, you know, as teachers, as admins, we have like 50 million meetings a day about all different types of things. And now we don't all have to wait and arrange to be in the same building at the same time. We can just hop on the Google Meet and say, okay, here's the meeting, you know.
It's an efficiency, yeah.
You know, it does make things more efficient. And, you know, like you said, like all of these new technologies have been popping up over the last couple of years in different classrooms. Like one of the ones that one of my co-teachers uses is called like Snap and Read, which is you can input it into your browser, and it so for students who might have differing abilities, it might read to them or it might translate the words, and it's built into the web page. So all of this stuff is popping up over the last couple of years because we needed it to, and the
Yeah.
technology was created, and it ends up making it better for so many learners.
You were gonna say something.
Yeah, I was going to say that before COVID, I remember hearing that this type of technology was 15, 20 years away. That like, oh, people will be working online in 2040, in 2030, but then COVID hit and it was happening in 2020.
There's a friend, I don't know who said
That's
it, but
actually-
mother is a necessity is the mother of invention, right? I don't know who said that, right? But we needed it, so we made it happen, right? And all of us did, right? Because students were learning too, right? Like students had to learn how to navigate these things.
Yeah.
That's actually like one of the biggest changes in COVID. The fact that a lot of jobs that you weren't even supposed to be in person for, you can now just work from home.
Yeah.
Like there's people
Yeah.
working for jobs here in the U.S. in another country.
Absolutely.
So you can finally like just pull so much talent together.
Yeah. I have a
Yeah.
friend of mine who moved to Costa Rica. He still works in the U.S., but he lives in Costa Rica.
Exactly.
That's his life.
Good for him. I love that for him.
Yeah, I feel like as tragic as COVID-19 was, I think you do take what you get from it. Like some people have learned a lot of new skills, have pursued certifications, vocational efforts. There's a lot of different things you could take from it. I believe in the future, this was unprecedented. Obviously, no one expected a pandemic to just come out of nowhere, but I believe in the future we'll be more prepared for crisis situations. So if we have to convert back to virtual or online or just pursue a different line of work, we're ready for it. because we've already been through a similar scenario.
Well, and we're planning for it. Let me be clear. Like the
Yeah.
school system isn't resting on its laurels, right? Like
Exactly.
we have plans in place so that we can switch virtual in a day, right? I mean, that is now the professional standard. The expectation is that we can, and let's be clear, this is not going to be our first pandemic.
Probably not.
Others are going to be coming, right?
Yeah.
It's just the nature of global climate change and mass human migration is we are going to have more pandemics, right? It's going to happen. So we're prepared for that. I think another area where I'm optimistic is in the past we used to talk about the instructional elements of children. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about the mental health of children or adults, right? Because I think, teachers are human too, right? And so we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that. And I think now all of us are pretty sensitive to the idea that I'm going to not call it mental health, I'm going to call it brain health. That brain health is important for, success and happiness. And so I think COVID has helped awaken that in us and helped us, be thoughtful about it and increasingly provide better structures.
Yeah, in Tomorrow's Teachers, I never talked about mental health for teachers and students before the pandemic. And I mean, it's because it's not in the curriculum, but now it is a part of it, and I think just this idea that it has become so increasingly okay to talk about mental health now. Whereas I got to tell you, there was not a teacher that when I went to school with 20 years ago, that would ever ask you, like, are you okay? How are you feeling? And I feel like the fact that more people can talk about, like, mental health and coping and stuff like that out in the open now is a really positive outcome from this. Because it's not really something that was ever super focused on, I think, before, but now, like, it is.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like because nobody really got away unscathed, more and more people can talk about it, and it's okay, and it normalizes, and that saves kids' lives.
I guess maybe it has something to do with the fact that finally, like, basically everyone in the school has a common experience now.
Yeah.
That's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because, like, every other time, like how you said, mental health, maybe something that happened to you couldn't really, like, someone else might not be able to relate to it, but everyone can relate to what happened in quarantine.
Right. Everyone has an experience
Exactly.
that came out of it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's
No.
an interesting observation.
Yeah.
No, I like that, guys. That's I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I do really think that the education system has really taken a good rebound after COVID. We're doing the best we can to make up for it, but I feel like no matter how good we do, the numbers from COVID, they still don't lie, and that's kind of what I want to talk about is testing and grades. They took a massive hit during the pandemic. I believe a study released by New Jersey, the federal government, they said that 50% of juniors that took the NJGPA last year, they didn't pass, and over 70% weren't proficient in English or math. And I believe that, especially among elementary schoolers, they've seen up to a 2-year regression in math and English skills. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that are as a tenured educator.
Well, I'm not tenured, but I know what you mean. Would you like to go first as a tenured educator?
Oh, I am. I am tenured here at Perth Amboy High School. No, it's one of those. It's obviously I note it. I've seen things in the past 2 years that I've never seen in any of the years that I've been a teacher. Even not even going into state tests, because again, we could go into the whole idea of legitimacy of state tests, and I'm not going to be one of those rah state test people to begin with. But even the differences in like students I had last year, I had more than one student who did not do one assignment last year. Not, oh, this kid doesn't ever do any work. Like, not one assignment the entire year. And I've never seen that before.
Wow.
And I mean, I've had kids that like had failing grades or like barely did anything and had to chase them down to get the assignment. But having students that literally just and did nothing, and it wasn't just my class. So I can only imagine what the scores look like. And I remember this quote that I heard that people continually focus on the concern over learning loss and learning loss and learning loss. If every single child experienced it, is it really learning loss across the board? You know, this idea that kids are going to fall behind, kids are going to fall behind. Fall behind what? We're all here. All the kids are here.
If
You
everyone
know.
falls behind, no one falls
Well,
behind.
right, they're all the same line, and you know, it's one of those things. Have students learn? Have students lost maybe the ability to have the motivation, or to have the ability to concentrate, or the want or need to do it? Have they lost what they might have gotten in person on like the hands-on activities and things? Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, and this is only my personal opinion, but we have so many people that focus so much on this idea of falling behind. But we had kids that were falling behind before COVID. You know, and it's kind of this idea of what does that actually mean in terms of post-COVID learning. Do we need to focus on rebuilding skills in kids of all ages? Absolutely. They lost a lot of things, educationally, socially, emotionally, all of that stuff. But when we kind of look at this on the test, it's kind of like, of course, kids, because it's like barriers to learning. If you have other things that are going on, your ability to learn is directly impacted.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that there's a lot of things to factor, and I think when like New Jersey or the federal government comes out with things like that, it's like, oh my God, 50% of kids failed this. It's like, yes.
Maybe the kids aren't the problem.
Yeah.
Well, but it's, you know, we're trying to transition back into too. I know that they suspended a lot of the state testing when we were
Yeah,
remote.
last year they
Yeah.
told us how we were basically guinea pigs. We just got the
Right,
test
and
just
it's-
to
and
see
it's-
if it was a good idea or not.
And it's like, here guys, I know that mom died from COVID, but like take this and make sure you tell me how
Yeah.
proficient in English you are. Like it's, you know, it's
Yeah. It's not appropriate.
it's I understand why they want to see where kids are, but to be like, oh man, 50% of kids, like,
What do you
Yeah.
expect?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
yeah, you know, it's, I'll never be a cheerleader for standardized testing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, administrator.
So I have a different view.
Of course you do.
A different
It's
view.
one of my favorite things about you.
Yeah, I think standardized tests can be useful. I am always cautious about reasoning from data, right? Correlation and causation are different. And so I do believe that people have done worse on those tests. There's no doubt about that. That's what the data says. Some of that is going to be because of learning loss, right? Just that. Some of it's going to be because of trauma. I'm curious at how much of it is due to apathy. How much of it is
Absolutely
due
plays a
with
part.
students who are like, you know what?
Right.
The test didn't matter before, so why do they matter now? And I'm not going to work dry.
Definitely.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying that's a thing. So
Oh,
that's
it's-
fine.
no,
Yeah,
that's-
I feel like-
that's absolutely a thing.
especially
Apathy
I
is-
feel like especially since it's a proficiency exam, some kids are like, oh, I'm not getting graded. This doesn't matter to like me passing or graduating, so I shouldn't try.
So I have to say, I think that there's some of that there. I don't think that, it's not to say that I don't think that there was an educational cost. There was. But I suspect it's not as high as some folks believe, and probably not as little as other folks believe, right? And so I don't know exactly how much. I think I think that that's not gonna come out in the wash for years.
We're way
but
far
also
out
at the
from
same
knowing.
time, maybe apathy, I imagine it did go up during COVID and quarantine and stuff,
Yeah.
but it's always been a thing. So
Right,
I
but
mean-
Are
You-
teenagers apathetic?
I mean, everything's always been a thing. It's just that we've
Yeah.
been so desensitized
Oh,
that
absolutely.
no one really cares anymore. Especially if you've lost family members, if you've seen what's happened
Right.
because of COVID, you just start to not care anymore.
And I think some kids didn't care about a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, you know, because to some extent, right, this drilled into what was very important, right? It was, you know, the people I love, are they healthy, right? And so I think some of that is apathy. I do, but I do think that we have some significant learning. You can't teach a room full of ceiling fans
Can't do it.
without having those kids not learn as much, right? And you can't have a child who has some mental health challenges right now, going through anxiety and depression, and not having someone recognize it and help them, right? Because remember, the parents who are at home taking care of the kids have got their own full, very busy lives, and they have other problems. Like some of them are like, I have to go to work, even though it's COVID, I still have to go to work, and now I have to leave my children at home, right? And so I think there's a cost to everyone.
Oh, they're well,
Definitely.
100%, and like with the apathy even too. Like, look, I had kids that did the ceiling fan, and then I had a sophomore. She's actually a senior here now, who used to come to my class, US2 honors, every day with her 2 baby siblings, and listen to the whole lecture and do all the work while taking care of these 2 babies
Right. I
at
think
the same time.
And that doesn't come without a cost, right? So I certainly, because schools provide not only education, right, but realistically, they also provide childcare, right? We're the most inexpensive babysitters in the world. We
I gotta
provide.
charge those
Think about it.
babysitter rates.
I pay a babysitter $15 an hour to take care of my children. That's what
Even
I pay.
that's cheap.
What?
Even
Yeah.
that's not a
You gotta-
lot.
you gotta
Yeah.
up
Yeah,
that-
you
gotta
got a
up
good
that.
deal.
Like,
So I pay my babysitter $15 an hour.
Dr. Ezel.
And all I'm really having her do is make sure that they don't do anything silly like stick a fork into a light socket or drink bleach or light the house on fire, right? That's really, I just want them to keep my kids safe. I pay them $15 an hour. Educators are much cheaper than that, right? And we provide social and emotional health, rigorous instruction, right? We do all sorts of things, right? So education is this huge social benefit of childcare, and we couldn't provide that. And so that comes at a cost too. So standardized tests, yeah, I mean, kids didn't learn as well. That's not surprising.
Yeah, it's
But I'm also optimistic we can get there. But I'm a little bit more pessimistic when it comes to everybody had learning loss, because you gave the example, you were able to send your children to school
Yes.
because you had the resources to do it, right?
Correct.
America socially is stratified financially, right? There are
Absolutely.
people who have and don't have, right? They're like, I need to have public education. I'm not going to send my child to a private school. I can't do it, and I wouldn't. But there are kids who went to school every day because they were doing COVID tests every single day. Like, they tested every kid in the school, so they could run a school pretty safely, which is a prohibitively expensive thing. So there are some people who have benefits, but there's also resilience. So I think it's actually hard to say what the costs are going to be down the road or what they are now.
Well, because we
For sure.
don't know.
We don't
Yeah,
have
it's
enough.
still way too early.
But look
Yeah.
at how
Right.
look at how some of the kids even from last year to this year have kind of rebounded. I said, like, some of my students, and one of my very good friends has almost all of my students from history last year. She has them this year, and when I go in and I creep in on them, there's so much more participation. There's so much more energy and so much more happiness from these same kids that I had that it wasn't there last year when we had just really fully come back
And
from remote.
even as a student myself, since I'm in the communications academy, a lot of the people in my classes are people I've had like multiple years. I can see it too.
Yeah, you guys can see it, and it is like when I say things, this year are so much better.
Mhm.
They really are, and I think that in terms of just like how you guys are.
Mhm.
Because again, like I said, like I've established, I don't really care about testing and things like that, but I do care that children that I knew last year are happier this year. They have less anxiety. They have more comfort in themselves and their friends. I've seen completely different children from June to now.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
like kids are resilient, and I hope that whatever learning loss you guys might have experienced, you will at some point recover from. Whether that's because we help with that, or just, society helps you with that, or just, kind of pushing through.
Mhm.
Where that comes from, I don't know where it's going to all come from yet, but I do see significant differences.
Interesting. So in the next 5 years of education, when we see like standardized testing or just an influx of grades, how significant do you think the trends will be among students?
Can you restate the question? I'm not sure I understand it.
So in terms of standardized testing and grades, how significant do you think the trends will be in the coming years? Will it be better, worse? How rapidly will it increase or decrease, in your opinion?
I have no idea.
I don't know. Like I'm of the personal belief, and again, this is just my opinion. I think that once we get the kids that were in elementary school in remote, once they start kind of transitioning up into the high school, we may see more of an upward trend and a lot of grades and less apathy, because those kids at that age didn't have the ability to kind of be reliant on video games and iPhones and things like that.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to develop a coping mechanism like older children did. So I think that because they necessarily did not have that, we may see maybe more of a positive increase in grades and less apathy and stuff like that. But I don't know, because you know it's one of those things that even in the last year I've seen
Yeah.
upward trends for some
There's
of
too
you
many
guys.
like factors that you can't really give a
Yeah.
definite answer to that.
Well, that's what I was going to
Well,
say.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm not sure what the tests right now. I'm not sure what the data was telling us, right? So we're going to learn that the longer we go. I don't know what the impact is on younger learners versus older learners, and what the impact is going to be longitudinally over time. I just don't know, and we're not going to know. What I would say is that along with learning loss, which there was some, right? I'm sitting in front of 4 very bright young men who are clearly capable. In that booth over there are smart and capable people who are doing good work, right? And I don't know what benefit COVID has provided you, right? Because certainly there was commensurate benefits. I think that you are more resilient now than you would have been otherwise. And I don't know how that's going to translate into your learning and the learning of other children later on. I don't know what we're going to do with testing regimes. I don't know what the goal is going to be, if they're going to change tests, if they're going to test for different things. I don't know. While I do think testing is helpful, if people take them, seriously, because it helps me identify where we're effective and where we aren't. I guess I care less about the testing and what the score is going to be, and more about the learning. And so I philosophically believe that if you learn rigorously, and we are effective at providing you instruction, and you are effective learners, that you will do well on tests if you choose to do well on tests, if it's a good test. And if it's not a good test, then it doesn't matter how well you've learned. And if you don't take it seriously, it doesn't matter, because you're not going to actually sit down and do it. So what I focus on is making sure that we support teachers so that they can give you so that they have the tools necessary to provide you rigorous, quality instruction so that you can learn, right? And then, if they do their job, you're going to do well on tests. So we shouldn't teach to a test, we should just teach young learners, and they're going to be successful. And that will be borne out or not, depending on the style of the test that's given, what they're trying to test for, what the conditions are during the test, whether the children think that the test is worth taking. All of those things go into success. As a matter of fact, there's some really interesting data. I'll give you one. There are some tests that ask like your race or your demographics before you take the test. Research shows that if you ask that question, kids do worse if they are part of what's historically marginalized groups. And if they are part of historically benefited groups, they do better, because there's something called stereotype threat and stereotype boost.
Heard about that.
Right. So it's extraordinarily difficult. It's not easy to figure out. Useful tools, but we have to be really thoughtful about them. And I mean, looking at you guys, I think this is really helpful to me, because you're able to have a thoughtful, rigorous conversation with good questions, and you're young, productive, and you're going to be successful Americans because of this. I'm excited about it.
We try.
Yeah.
Well, you succeed, actually.
Yeah.
Do or do not. There is no try, so saith Yoda.
Yeah, this podcast is a successful outlet for all of us to really get our thoughts out about the education system after 2 years of just being like cooped up in our house. I feel like this is very good, especially for the target audience. I feel like many of them can relate to what we're saying, and might even like say something in the comments like, oh, I agree with this, blah, blah, blah. But it's kind of odd. It's fascinating and odd the same way that we as a society can all relate to one thing unanimously that we've all been affected by negatively. And I feel like that's kind of inspiring and tragic at the same time. But it is, like I said earlier, you take what you get from it. So I do think it is kind of interesting.
Honestly, it is just a random question, but if you could just like delete quarantine and be normal, like instead like just make it never happen, would you? Like, it's just like out of nowhere. Because honestly, I
Well, as
don't
long as
know
we're
if I would.
excusing all the people that died.
Yeah, I was about to mention that.
Like if you're just saying just the quarantine itself, then that'd be a hard
Yeah, if we're
question.
reaping social benefits, I think I might still go through
All right, let me
quarantine.
make it a bit more specific on specifically like what you gained yourself, like how
Oh.
exactly it went for you personally.
I mean,
I
the resilience you gain from COVID-19, like you may learn to be like more independent and more like free think. You might be more of a free thinker, but I feel like the cons outweigh the pros. You would develop these skills anyway over time, like when you're in your mid-20s. But now that we're 17 and we're thinking about how to be more independent, pursue different avenues, I don't think it really outweighs the fact that we spent 2 years in isolation, just like void of human interaction, just looking at screens all day. It did not help at all.
Yeah, I feel like to an extent COVID kind of ruined me
Yeah.
because I was entering the freshman year, and that was sort of a time where I was getting more relaxed and used to talking to people more, because middle school was really socially like anxious. Like I was not talking to that many people. The freshman year is when I started getting more used to that. And then when COVID hit, it all just went flat. So I feel like, I would take it out.
Yeah, I feel like a common thing a lot of people do, they compare themselves to the hypothetical of what it would be like if COVID did not exist. I would be in shape. I would be like so much. I would have good grades. I would be doing so much better. And I fell into that trap too. Like everyone has done that at one point after quarantine. It's like, if this didn't happen, I would have been doing so much better. And now I look at myself in the mirror and I think there's no use in comparing myself to that hypothetical because I am what I am right now.
Yeah.
I gained what I got from COVID. I lost what I lost from COVID. The only thing I could do now is take what I got and just keep going forward. Comparing myself to the
Completely agree.
hypothetical, it just doesn't help at all.
I mean, I'll keep the technology, but like maybe lose the multiple like mental health crises.
Yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
think even too, like even like the strain, my sleep cycle.
Oh,
My sleep cycle, because that March through June of 2020 when I was senior class advisor, so I had to do all of this stuff for all of these kids remotely. But like trying to get all these kids through, I was responding to messages and emails and stuff up until 1 o'clock in the morning for my kids. And it was like one of those things that I wanted to do it, but it was also guilt because like what could I do to help them? And the
Yeah.
kids knew that if they messaged me and I was awake, I would respond. But the problem was I had so much anxiety from school and COVID and having to go to ShopRite with like 30 masks at like 9:30 p.m. because that's when nobody else was there and you know, all that stuff. I was sleeping from maybe 2 a.m. to like 5:30 a.m. and that was my sleep cycle for over a year.
For me, it was like I was still getting mostly enough sleep. It's just that I have blinds in my room, and we humans are kind of accustomed to this like sunlight. So when you don't really get enough sun, your sleep kind of just gets weird.
Your vitamin D
Yeah.
levels.
It's not even vitamin D levels. It's just like, you know how they say that the best way to get a good like fall asleep fast is to have a completely dark room, because when you get sunlight, your body kind of like forces itself to be awake. So the fact that it got to the point where I would just wake up school and just stay inside the whole day, I never had that like the actual sunlight, or like I just felt like I had less energy throughout the day,
Yeah.
like a lot less energy.
I
Well, and you were sitting in a chair for like
Yeah.
8 hours in front
Exactly.
of a computer too.
I remember it was horrible for me during winter because in my room, like I sleep in the attic. And there's one window in my entire room, and it's like all the way over there, and I'm sitting at like the other side of the room with my computer and everything. And it would get dark at like 4.
Right.
And like
It's
right
the
after
worst,
like
right?
school would be over, so around 5 I would nap, which was horrible because I would have school the next morning. So that
So
completely
you took a
tarnished.
nap, but what time did you get up again?
Like 9.
Right, and then you were up until what
I was
time?
4 or 5.
Right.
I would get 2 hours of sleep right before school started.
Yeah,
It was
that's-
horrible.
And that was almost everybody.
Yeah.
So and that, like again, with this unique shared experiences, you know, but even too, a lot of that even bleeds into now, even though we're quote unquote more normal, I still don't have a normal sleep cycle.
Oh,
I mean, I'm
definitely.
not staying up till like 1:45 in the morning playing video games as a grown up or anything, but you know, I do stay up late and watch videos.
Oh, I saw that look.
Yeah.
You know, or the TikTok scroll.
Yeah.
For however long, but it's almost like I can't sleep a lot of times. I eventually do, but
I actually do agree with you with the can't sleep analogy because I do, especially when you're in front of a screen for a long time, the amount of blue light, you just can't fall asleep.
Right.
Like, I tried to cut myself off like
It's
during
late, you're
quarantine.
talking.
I tried to cut myself off at 10 or 11 p.m. and just say, I'm going to get at least 8 hours. I'm going to wake up and then go to school.
That's discipline. Good
Yeah,
for you.
and then like sometimes it would work, and other times I would watch like 2 full movies and then just go to bed at like 4 in the morning. Like
That's
it
less
varies.
good. I'm not going to compliment that.
It
First
definitely
part,
shouldn't.
very good. Second part,
Yeah.
a lot less good.
But I'm proud. A majority of the time, I would try and cut myself off at 10 or 11, and it worked. But other times, you just can't really resist it in a sense. You just next thing you know, it's 4 in the morning. Go to bed.
Yeah.
And even then, I don't feel tired. I just feel obligated to just close my eyes and wait.
Yeah, the screen time for me was like my big thing. Like before COVID, you know, I was on for, you know, maybe 5-6 hours on my computer, which seems like a lot, like even before. But like then it was like I added the 8 hours of school on top of the 5-6 hours I normally have.
Right.
And then I realized, I'd spend almost my entire waking day on my computer, just
Yeah.
looking at a screen.
Oh, but that changed away a lot of things that I did in my classroom just because of that, and I realized how long some of my students were on that. So like before COVID, I had really assigned homework and stuff. Not a lot of homework, but like some. But once we were remote, I never, ever, ever assigned it again because I was like, these kids are on that computer for 8 hours. I'm not going to give them an additional assignment to continue to sit on the computer for.
Yeah, it was
And I-
hard.
You know, it's so it changed it, and I never went back ever since we came back. Sorry.
And I remember we had those shortened schedules in sophomore year. Would you say they helped with students, like both mentally and for their learning?
What was the shortened schedule? I wasn't
Oh,
here then.
You know that, right?
they were like it was like asynchronous.
You know,
asynchronous
So they
learning.
would
Okay.
be, it would rotate the classes, and they would be,
Kinda like the midterm
sometimes you would,
schedule,
sometimes
except
you would
without the
meet,
blocks.
sometimes you would meet, and sometimes you wouldn't, but then you would still assign asynchronous work on certain days, and we
Right.
did that for like,
To limit screen time, probably.
well, that and it just because there were still gaps in the technology and stuff, and they had technology access, and that's when they were setting up all the hotspots and things like that.
Right.
And mostly because it just, that March to June was just like nuts. And, you know, it was at that point where kids' parents were so sick and like they had to be the one to work. I had kids at McDonald's in my Google Meet and stuff,
Yeah.
you know, but that was a weird adjustment.
It was.
That
weird.
was a
It
very
was.
Like even-
strange adjustment to make. And it worked in a lot of ways, but then it didn't. But it also lended a lot of kids that really needed the structure of at least being on in the class at a schedule. It took that away from them. And that's when we saw a lot of, especially seniors that year, just drop off the face of the earth
That's interesting.
towards the end of April when they had that schedule. Yeah.
Interesting.
Because they couldn't, it just was too much because I'll see if I can find you a copy of the schedule. It was a very strange schedule. It was almost like the midterm schedule,
Yeah, I
but
remember.
like half asynchronous.
Even trying to follow, like trying to remember or
Which
like even
days were
check.
which.
Yeah, which days were which?
No,
which
it
days
was-
were tomorrow?
It was like
Oh my god.
wasn't it like an A through Q
It was like
schedule?
A,
or
no, it was like
something?
A through
J.
Or A through J or no,
No, Jay.
it was it was a.
I remember up to
F, I
F.
think.
Now
Yeah.
see now you can see my remote PTSD because I had forgotten all about that, and now it's like all flooding back to me because I even as a teacher I'd forget which day we were, and I'd have to text. I'd be like text Mr. Bouchard or Mr. Fraccio, is it a C day?
Oh no, it's an E day.
It's an E day. Oh God, like I have like all the wrong stuff. Yeah.
was
I
horrible.
deleted it by now, but
Oh,
I
no,
had
it's-
it
I
on my
guarantee it's-
calendar.
I guarantee
I
it's
said it so that
somewhere.
I would repeat.
Now, is that
it
when
in
you
my
were
calendar.
virtual or when you were bringing people into the school?
No, it was virtual.
Virtual.
Okay, all right.
That was
I
virtual.
don't remember. I think it was both.
I think
pretty
it
sure.
was both.
Well,
we
because
had
remember, only some
cohorts.
people came back to school.
Right.
Barely
yeah.
anybody.
I don't
Like
even
3
remember that because
kids.
like no one did that.
Yeah, we
I remember, like-
cohorted kids in my other school, and then they would come in like, there'd be 6 kids in a class.
Yeah.
And then that way, if somebody got sick, it was only those 6 people who had to quarantine, right? And so we'd break classes up into like thirds, and then boom.
They
boom,
had
boom.
permission slips. It was either I'm staying or not.
Yeah,
and
we
then-
did that too.
And
then
it
we
was,
cohorted
I
them.
think I had maybe one kid I had maybe one kid in most of my classes, and then one class I had was like, it was great. There was like 4. And I was like, oh, I'm so excited to see you guys.
I mean, I
Um,
guess just overall, quarantine was a very interesting time in our life.
Yeah, and then post-COVID, and post-COVID this year. It's like been so hectic, and like there've been so many like highs and lows, and
I'm honestly kind of excited to see in the future, like how like the long-term effects, because right now we only have the short-term
Yeah,
effects.
especially once we enter college, that's gonna be very interesting.
Well, there's no doubt, life is interesting,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you should always be excited for the future because it's going to be a surprise, I promise.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Yeah, pretty much all the time.
It's going to be fun.
There's something new all the time. When you get used to adulthood, then you have your midlife crisis and all that stuff. And, you know, it goes straight through. Oh, but I think for you guys especially, it's probably very hard hitting because it like all your formative, like social, hormonal, emotional years, you're like, oh no, I'm sorry, stay in your house for 2 years and you know, stay on mute.
I
And
mean, humans are social.
we are.
Yeah,
I was curious about it, not super curious, but a little curious, like about the dating world. Like, because you think about it, I know in high school, like I learned like how to, like I learned middle school and high school was like when I learned, I'm a husband now, but where I learned to like date, right? To, like say, hey, like I like you and like I want to like, you know, do things with you. Like let's go see it. But for 2 years,
I felt like long-term relationships,
Right, a lot of-
long-distance relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you were
and
in
they
the
don't
same
really
street.
work, right? I mean, the problem is that I don't know about you, but when my wife and I fight, like the one thing I don't do is text, right? Because like so I don't. We know when we're grumpy at each other because we don't text. Because we've learned that if you text, somebody will project their feelings onto it, and so I care about the relationship so much that I'm not going to do anything but have a conversation to your face. But
If you can't do that,
if you can't do that, right? And then on the flip side, for like 6 months, we were in the house together. We didn't leave, and she was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Oh," right? You know, so-
I was
Yeah.
definitely sick of being in my house all the time. But that's the thing too, is like it's if you are in the house with the same people all the time, that causes tension and conflict too.
Oh,
You know
definitely.
what's funny though? I really, for us, because I have 2 children and my wife and dog, we did this thing called street frisbee, right? So everybody was off the roads. And I live on like a very busy like road, but nobody was driving around, so we could play frisbee. So every day we had like a time, unless it was raining, then we went outside and as a family we would play street frisbee. And then other people in the neighborhood would come out and we would all play street frisbee together. And that part was really a lot of fun, actually. Like, that was nice. My daughter's birthday during COVID, right? I hired a clown. And
terrifying.
and then it was a really good clown from Ringling Brothers Bar and Merrily Circus. He was really good. And but what we did was we because nobody was on the streets, all of our neighbors, we just said, hey, come outside and we're gonna have this man like ride unicycles and do stuff like on the street. So it created a sense of community, which was kind of neat. But no, I would not want to do the quarantine.
Interesting.
No, we had my husband and I both taught remotely at the same time from home all day, every day, and we had this really fun game time that was called Don't Strangle Each Other,
Okay.
to try to keep from strangling each other because we were home with each other
I guess
all
what we-
day, every
That's
day.
interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess what we can really take out of that is that despite everything that happened, quarantine still had its moments.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it was amazing.
Absolutely,
And
clown moments,
yeah,
Right.
marital bliss.
expensive clown moments.
I think life is actually really sweet, guys.
Yeah.
Right? So even when it's hard, it's always easy to find sweet stuff. And the sweet stuff remembers. As a matter of fact, right, you're going to look back at some of the worst times in your life. I know, when I was in the military, it turns out that some of the worst times become funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like all we
Maybe
can
not
do is
for
just
me.
look ahead, be hopeful.
Overall, though,
Yeah.
I'm grateful for everything we talked about today.
Yeah, it's
Thank
great.
you for.
Yeah, I think that's all the time we have left. So thank you guys for coming
Thank
here,
you.
talking,
Thank you.
sharing everything.
This was fun.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And this was the last episode of season 1. Had a lot of fun here. We had our moments, had highs, had some lows, had some mic issues as always. But at the end of the day, I think we did a good job here. And I hope to see you guys for season 2 of Education Contemplation. So
Yeah.
bye.
So yeah.
Bye.